The PlayAction podcast is fueled by Picasso's Pizza, where every night is pizza night.
The Bills got their first crack at the 53-man roster this week. We'll dive into what we make of some of the moves there.
Christian Kirksey joined the team on the practice squad. The expectation is he will soon be part of a crowded competition at middle linebacker.
And we'll each give one thing we're still looking for as the Bills get closer and closer to that season opener. The Play Action podcast starts now. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Play Action podcast. I'm Katherine Fitzgerald, joined for this episode by Jay Skurski. And the Bills finalized, they made their roster moves this week. It's never totally final, always going to be in a flux, but cut to 53 men, have their practice squad going now. Jay, what are just some of your early thoughts on the guys that they kept, who they moved on from?
Yeah, I didn't think there were any real major surprises, quite frankly. I think going into training camp, we probably knew 47, 46, 47 of the 53 spots and how many jobs were realistically up for grabs. I don't think it was that big of a number. Some of the positions that got a lot of attention, I quite frankly didn't think that it was that much of a competition. Wide receiver, right? Andy Isabella, is he going to make the team? Is he not? What are we talking? Is the fourth, fifth, sixth receiver on the roster a guy who maybe doesn't even get a jersey on game day? So I thought keeping Justin Shorter there made sense. I thought keeping Khalil Shakir, who they've invested in, with a fifth-round draft pick and have tried to develop him, makes a lot of sense. So it wasn't real surprise there. I think the most interesting thing that I was waiting to see was how they sorted out the defensive line room. We knew going into camp that there was a numbers crunch there, right? And ultimately it results in a trade, sending Boogie Basham to the Giants. And Katherine, I know you wrote on that, and you'll have some more on that. But I thought that was pretty interesting. Some of the other competitions, if you want to call them that, it wasn't so much about who was or wasn't going to make the team. It was about who was going to start. And I think a lot of that is still up in the air.
Yeah, so they made some smaller moves too, putting Shorter, Balin Spector on IR. Von Miller is going to start the year on PUP now, we know, which I felt was kind of trending that way. But he'll miss the first 4 weeks of the season now. But yeah, the Boogie trade to the Giants, which a classic between the Bills and Giants at this point. It was interesting talking to Brandon Beane this week about, sometimes while he still thinks Boogie will be a great player there, it just wasn't meshing here to the level they wanted. But again, a crowded room as well, too. So I thought it was interesting also just to hear him talk some about, this is the second year in a row they've traded away a former second-round pick in late August with Cody Ford the year before. He said so far he doesn't think there's really too much correlation between that. It was more injuries in Ford's case, crowded room in Basham's, but that is something he's going to keep self-scouting a little bit on.
Well, he has to, right? These are big misses. And when you have a top-heavy roster, a veteran roster like the Bills have right now, when you're talking about Von Miller and Stephon Diggs, Tre'Davious White, all of these guys that are highly paid, some of them, especially in Von's case, getting toward the end of their career, the way that you replenish this and sort of keep this thing rolling with Josh Allen in his prime is through young talent. And when you're missing on second and third round picks continually, and let's call it what it is, that is what they're doing right now. They are missing on those picks. That is not a way to sustain success. And, Brandon Beane talks a lot about, you've got to hit on your draft picks, draft, develop, re-sign. That's his philosophy. Well, they're drafting, but they're not developing and they're not re-signing right now with some of these guys. And you can, extend that beyond Boogie Basham to, look at what happened with Tremaine Edmonds, right? He walks. And I get it. You're not going to be able to pay everyone, but, AJ Epinesa, where do they stand with him? Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, both third-round picks, no longer here. So there are a lot of these examples of day one into day two picks not panning out for them. And I think it's a legitimate criticism of Beane right now. I think it's something that they have to get right, and they have to get it right in a hurry because you're going to have to eventually replace these guys like Von Miller, like Stephon Diggs. And the best way to do it, the most cost-efficient way to do that is with draft picks. And right now they're not hitting on enough of those.
Yeah, and then just to touch back on Miller for a little bit more, obviously the Basham trade was separate from that since Miller will be out those 4 games at least. He's eligible to come back week 5 against the Jaguars in London. Jay, how do you think they get by that stretch without him? Brandon Beane talked repeatedly about how, they want him for the postseason, they want him for the long term, and it was kind of a move out of caution. Vaughn maybe felt ready, but Vaughn is very optimistic, so I think he always feels ready. What did you make of that decision?
Yeah, Vaughn has signed every available free agent. He was ready to play probably last year in the playoffs if they would have needed him. No, he's ever the optimist. No, I mean, totally logical. I thought from day one that was the move. There's no point in rushing him back. You'd like to have him against Aaron Rodgers in week one, but what Von Miller are you getting if you put him out there that early? We saw last year it took Tre'Davious White exactly 1 calendar year to return to the lineup. I think Miller will beat that timeline, also getting hurt on Thanksgiving. I do think he'll be back before Thanksgiving this year. But listen, with the investments that they've made on the defensive line, they need to be in a position where they can handle this. And that's both draft pick investments, right? Greg Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, and then free agency. What they were able to do late in free agency, signing Leonard Floyd, I think gives them another starting caliber player. So if your 4 defensive ends in the first week are Shaq Lawson, Leonard Floyd, Epinesa, and Rousseau, I think you can get by. Not only get by, but I think that can be a pretty effective unit, particularly when you add in, what they have at defensive tackle and what you hope you get from an interior pass rush there. So this team was well positioned to make it through at least the first month of the season without Von Miller. I don't think that this should be anything that impacts drastically the results of their season by a lot. I think that they should be able to weather this storm, weather this stretch without Von Miller. And really, you hope that he hits the ground running in week 5. But even if it takes longer than that, week 5 is that London game. If you don't want to, stress him with that amount of travel and you come back in week 6, I think even that would be fine. So I don't think there should be any rush to bring Von Miller back. And I'm not surprised at all that he's starting on PUP.
Now, the Bills also started making their practice squad this week. A lot of familiar faces, guys who spent training camp with them. But one more interesting one, they brought in linebacker Christian Kirksey. Jay, you talked to him some this week. What do you make of getting to know him so far, what he could mean to this team?
Yeah, veteran guy, 31 years old. Actually talked to him on his birthday. I'm sure that's the way he wanted to spend his birthday, talking to the Buffalo media after signing with the Bills. But I think, really interesting to hear him talk about how he has learned 7 different defenses in his time in the NFL. And obviously the Bills are hoping that he gets up to speed really quickly, because I do think that he is going to be in the mix at middle linebacker for this team. One of the storylines that we followed all summer was, how do they replace Tremaine Edmonds? And I don't feel like they're any closer to an answer today than when they got to St. John Fisher back in July. They tried Tyrell Dotson, they tried Terrell Bernard, they tried Bale Inspector, they tried AJ Klein. None of them really worked all that well. And so I think it's ultimately going to be Dotson or Bernard here in the short term by default, because that's who's left. They cut AJ Klein. Bale Inspector, we know, is beginning the season on injured reserve. But I don't know that, based on the results of that competition, if they were at all pleased with what they had at the position. So when Kirksey hit the open market, when he was released by the Texans, I'm not surprised at all that the Bills moved quickly to bring him here. This is a player that they have had an interest in before in free agency. He is exceptionally close with Micah Hyde. They went to college together at Iowa. They consider themselves to be best of friends. So Kirksey knows a lot of the guys on this defense. He knows Jordan Poyer well. And I think that's going to help him as he gets up to speed. I do not anticipate him being on the practice squad for very long. I think that putting him on the practice squad gives him an opportunity right now to learn that defense. They don't have to throw him out on the field in week 1. But I would not be surprised at all if we see Christian Kirksey join the 53-man roster and ultimately become this team's starting middle linebacker sooner rather than later.
Yeah, he was a surprise cut. As you mentioned, Beane had an element middle linebacker. Sean McDermott, a couple eye on him before. But now there was a bit more of that urgency, right? They still haven't solved their problem. Weeks ago was saying that he saw room for improvement there. Clearly they haven't named a starter. Brandon Beane, when we talked to him this week after roster moves, was saying how, just the reality is they don't necessarily have a guy who's going to Canton in this group. And that's okay. That's how this works in the NFL sometimes. You can't have a star at every single position from a financial standpoint. And that's the reality this team is in right now. You mentioned that before of why they have to hit on these picks early on. But that's kind of just, they're still solving that. Injuries have made it a little trickier with Terrell Bernard in particular, but he's back to practicing. So I think just kind of as they continue to work through that, it's nice to have some insurance there with a veteran experience from Kirksey. They had really valued that in AJ Klein. He knew Sean and Brandon from Carolina. They loved his experience, but ultimately moved on from him.
I was a little bit surprised by
what
that.
Did you make of that?
Not necessarily that they moved on from him, but that they didn't also bring him back to the practice squad. And maybe maybe if Kirksey doesn't hit the open market, Klein is here on the practice squad. Because I agree with you. I think that Sean McDermott wants somebody that he can trust out there. And I don't know what his trust level is with Tyrel Dotson. I certainly don't know what it is with Terrell Bernard. I mean, how could it be anywhere with Terrell Bernard? I mean, the guy missed the entire preseason with a hamstring injury. I mean, just talk about terrible timing for him. So I am a little bit surprised that Klein isn't back. But, you touched on McDermott's comments about the middle linebacker. And I mean, listen, this is from a coach who says nothing as a rule, right? I mean, he will not let you in at all. And for him to be as open about that, I think says a lot about where they viewed that competition. And Brandon Beane is underselling it when he says that, they maybe don't have a guy that's destined for Canton at that position. They don't have any answers. And, it would be one thing if it weren't the middle linebacker, the position that they determine or have sort of identified as the signal caller of the defense. Now, yes, somebody else could do that, but that's not what they've done. They believe in the middle linebacker calling the defense. So to have that position unsettled, go this close to the start of the regular season, I think has got to be a little bit nerve-wracking for the coaching staff. And I think that's reflected in Sean McDermott's comments because, again, we don't hear him speak that way really about anything. So for him to be that blunt about it, really, I think it shows just how deep it runs, sort of the questions and maybe even the frustration in some ways that they're feeling at that position.
Now, as we record, we're 11 days out from the Bills' season opener against the New York Jets. Jay, we just talked extensively to solve in this next stretch before they head intensively about middle linebacker. But outside of that, what do you think this team most needs to New York to take on the Jets?
Well, I'm really curious to see how the offensive line plays out. I think we know the five that are going to be out there. You're looking at Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown at tackle, Mitch Morse at center, Connor McGovern at left guard, and then I think Osiris Torrance is going to be the starter at right guard, even if they haven't officially announced that. I think based on what we saw in the preseason, what we saw at training camp, the practices that we could watch, he certainly looks like he's won that job over Ryan Bates. And so you're starting a rookie there on the right side next to Spencer Brown, who has had his fair share of struggles. Really, the tackles, both Dawkins and Brown, I thought at times underperformed in the preseason. You go back to that Steelers game and the heat that Josh Allen was under, that is going to be a really big concern for this team, a really big question that they need to answer early in the year. And it starts right away in week one. We know that the Jets have a very good defense overall, but they're very strong up front defensively on that defensive line. And we know it's going to be loud in MetLife Stadium. The crowd is going to be amped for this, Monday Night Football opener. There's a lot at stake for the Bills' offensive line this season. Protecting Josh Allen, of course, has to be this franchise's number one priority. And they get a big test right away in week one. So I'm most curious and most interested in watching how that offensive line works together.
Yeah, like you said, protecting Josh Allen is so key. Deion Dawkins did say after that Steelers game that it was just below their standards. Even with that offensive piece being so critical, for me, what I'm still really interested to watch, I'm going back to defense, that cornerback 2 battle. Again, they still don't exactly know. Brandon Beane was saying this week how, he thinks they all had solid camps. He said Dane Jackson, he thought, had the best camp he's had since he's been a Bill. Kaiir Elam and Christian Benford both still, taking steps into their second year as well. But they still have to figure that out. There was one point during camp where John Butler made it sound like maybe they would switch it up game to game versus within a game. They don't want to rotate there. But Sean McDermott pushed back on that a bit recently, saying it'd be ideal to have someone solidified there. So that's another thing I'm keeping an eye on. Lots to still see over the next stretch. We'll have all your Bills news on buffalonews.com and Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Treat your team to the most flavorful pizza on game day at Picasso's Pizza. 4 great Western New York locations: Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Picasso's. We are Buffalo's Pizza since 1980. Order online today at picassospizza.net.